Fundamentally, I believe that everybody, has the right to a decent home. When we formed in 2017, we were building about 500 to 600 homes. And actually, it was about building as many social rented homes as we could. And that's remained a priority for us sort of since, really.
What are some of the steps that you took to sort of help scale up that building priority?
One is that clear purpose around it. Two is, I think, understanding that you can't do it without some sort of financial strength. Three, I think, is a little bit about, from a development perspective, we've got ourselves to position to, rather than talk about all the reasons why we shouldn't do something, to talk about all the reasons why we should do something.
What do you see as some of the things that we might be able to unlock to really move the dial on the housing crisis and really push forward?
I think...
Bart, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. Hope you're well.
Yeah, very well, thank you. Like I always like to start, do you mind just by giving us a little introduction to yourself and the organisation you work for?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mark Perry. I'm Chief Executive at Vivid. We're based in the central south, really, so sort of Hampshire, Sussex, Surrey, around that sort of area. 36,000 homes. Operating across 20-odd local authorities. We're sort of fairly unique organisation, I think, in a way. We're big, but we're local, which I think is not sort of necessarily norm. I think the sector is dominated by smaller local providers or large nationals. We're sort of somewhere bridging the two, which I think is quite unique. We're a G1, V1 under the old IDA regime, quite a large developer, committed to our customer services and sort of being a little bit different, I suppose, what we want to try. We set out in 2017 as a product of a merger, and we set out trying to be a little bit different.
Like
and
that.
that's what we've tried to sort of do. Hence the name, and just sort of the way we try and go about things, really.
Yeah, and talk to people about your journey at Vivid, because you've been there a long time. So, like, what's been the journey through the business?
So I've been in social housing probably about 30 odd years, I suppose. Actually, most of my career was spent at what is now Clarion, which at the time was Affinity Sutton. So we did sort of lots of mergers, lots of growth. I think I joined Affinity Sutton, there were about 15,000 homes. I left when we were about 60,000 homes. I came to Sentinel, about 10,000 homes in North Hampshire, and joined there in about 2013 as Chief Executive. It was my second stint as a Chief Executive somewhere. We sort of got that knocked into shape. And then in 2016, started a discussion with what was then First Wessex, and we did the merger, which created Vivid in 2017. Actually, some interesting things about the merger. I think we were at the time probably almost the quickest merger in the sector. So we did our merger in about 9 months, which was quite unusual at the time. We had sort of 3 big ambitions, really, which I think probably linked to what we're going to talk about a little bit later around development. Ambition around providing excellent sort of customer services, an ambition around increasing our financial strength, and an ambition around increasing our development output. So they were the sort of big 3 ticket items we were trying to do. We drove about £12 million of efficiencies out of the business through the merger process. We did that in about 18 months. So we were ahead of our efficiency plan, which I think has created the financial capacity to allow us to do some of what we're doing now, really.
Yeah, and today is all about development, and actually very topical. We've just been talking offline about that. Very topical given the budget, but also very topical because it's been a topsy-turvy year, I would say. Well, 2 years maybe, around a lot of people scaling back their development activity, but it feels like you've really pressed on. So just talk us about why that was so important for Vivid as a starting point, and then we can get into the detail a little bit.
When we formed Vivid, I think we had a really clear sort of social purpose, really, about one about the impact we could have in changing the lives of people who live in our locality, our geography, and that's the more homes bit of our vision. And 2, around providing really good services, sort of springboards and safety nets for people who live in our locality. So those 2 things go hand in hand. We set out some really clear principles, I think, about how we wanted to do that. At the back of that was something around financial strength, and something about actually playing our bit in helping solve the housing crisis. When we formed in 2017, we were building about 500 to 600 homes. In combined, we set an objective to get to 1,200 homes in 3 years. So from 2017 to 2020. And actually it was about building as many social rented homes as we could. The size of the development program is really about how we use the levers we have available to us to make sure we can build the maximum amount of social homes as possible. And I suppose fundamental to our belief was something around, it doesn't have to be an either or, it can be an and. We can do great services, keep our existing customers safe and secure in their home, and we can build loads more homes. So that's sort of what we sort of set about doing, really. And that's remained a priority for us sort of since, really. We've set ourselves up to achieve those things, really.
Yeah, and obviously there's not like a one size fits all in this situation, right? And what are some of the steps that you took to sort of help scale up that building priority or that building program, I suppose?
I think having that sort of clear objective and aspiration, and everybody vocalizing that. And actually, fact, James, it has good things and bad things, because what you pull in one direction pushes in another sort of thing, doesn't it? So,
correct.
In some respects, it's made it quite difficult for us to get our customer voice out a little bit more, really, because people think we're only about developing new homes. But actually, it does go back to that. We think it's fundamentally, we can give people a house that otherwise they wouldn't have had the opportunity to. So what are some levers? I think so. One is that clear sort of purpose around it. Two is, I think, understanding that you can't do it without some sort of financial strength. So we're absolutely all over our financial numbers in this organisation. It's like a relentless thing that we do, because that's about financial capacity to be able to take that development risk. Three, I think, is a little bit about understanding what your risk appetite is. We're very clear. We've got a very dynamic board of non-executive directors here, most of which have come from different organisations and different backgrounds, and aren't necessarily just ex-housing people, if you like. So they bring a different sort of risk appetite to the table. We're very clear about our risk appetite. And then being open to doing things a little bit differently, being open to experimenting a bit and failing a bit on one or two things. We haven't got everything right.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We thought we were really clever in doing some really innovative partnerships in terms of off-site manufacturing, and both of those sort of fell over pretty quickly. So you've got to be prepared to experiment a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, just from a leadership perspective, I'm interested, Mark. You've got to have real bravery to continue with that vision of development when everyone else is going the other way. What was the thing that made you just press on with the plan? Because, I know you vocalised it, so it's difficult to go back on these things, but it certainly took a bit of bravery last year to continue developing when everyone else was doing the opposite.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm quite flattered that you said that, actually, to be honest with you. I lived in social housing. I was sort of born and raised in social housing, so I suppose fundamentally, I believe that everybody, has the right to a decent home, and it's an important facet of your life. It's worked well for me. It's, we hope it works well for other people. We set about, in moving our development aspirations, we were determined, and this goes right across everything we do, actually. We're determined not to be, a little bit in and a little bit out, and in and out, shake it all about sort of type stuff. We've been determined to be consistent and methodical and planned and so on and so forth. So actually, part of our development success is based on the fact that we're in the market, and we're sort of always in the market, really. So people begin to rely on us, they begin to rely on, they know what we stand for. And you are right. It does take a little bit of organisational courage to be doing stuff that others might be sort of backing away from. But I think if you've got the fundamental building blocks in place, that risk, and you understand what your risk appetite is, I think to some degree you can feel comfortable taking that risk. And then I think the final point I'd say, I think it's better to go out with a bang than a whimper, isn't it?
Definitely.
Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
So this organisation, so I said right at the beginning about we try to set ourselves up to be a bit different. I think this organisation is about how we can push the envelope with the things we do, within the safe confines. We're not a G1B1 organisation because we're inherently risky. We are an interesting combination, actually. We're doing all of this development. We've got great customer services. And we're a G1B1. So we've sort of got the ship, I feel we've got the ship relatively well balanced, to be honest.
I like that. And look, what have been some, you mentioned one about the off-site manufacturer, and I also went down that place of this is going to be the future, and I was very vocal on the podcast about it. So, I can't go back now. That's on the internet somewhere. But what have been some of the challenges, and what have been some of the things that didn't quite go to plan? Because you never just create a development plan that's going to get to 1,200 homes a year without some problems and some interesting risk. But what have been some of the things that haven't gone so well that you've learned from and been able to implement to inspire the next generation of house building within Vivid?
So we created this financial capacity, and then we thought, well, okay, we'll just discharge it, some of that through our development ambitions. And actually, last year we did just over 1,500 homes. We'll probably do a similar number for the next 2 or 3 years. And actually, what we learned very quickly was actually there just isn't the supply chain in our locality to be able to deal with that volume. And if you're not careful, your risk buckets to each developer starts to become quite large. And so we had to sort of have a really hard think about how we facilitate small, medium-sized enterprises, how we go about doing that, really. We simply couldn't work with all the big national house builders. There just wasn't, there's just not enough activity going on. I think the second thing is we needed to be careful that we didn't set the price for everything, because we were keen to build more homes, that we weren't the offer of last resort and therefore overpaying for stuff. So we've had to learn that a little bit on the hoof. Are we? Quite actually, I talked to my development team now. I think there's still something about the business sort of catching up with how successful we've been, if that makes sense. But we're sort of doing that as we go along. We're actually quite fortunate. We haven't had any of our development partners go to the wall. So we're sort of in for the long term, really. We sort of do a deal, and we sort of say to people that that's the deal we're prepared to do. If it gets really difficult, don't just sort of, close the shop up. Come and have a conversation with us, and we'll work with you to try and overcome those issues, really. And that, I think, has worked really well. We've also done some really sort of different deals, if you like. We were clear, I think, about where we could add value. So, when others do this as well. So we've done, quite a few joint ventures where we've shared risks. We with small, medium-sized enterprises that are sort of almost startup, we put our money in early. We brought a small regional developer, actually, because they had a large land bank and some expertise we didn't have. So we've just tried to be, I think, commercial about it. Some of the things we got right. We thought MMC was the future, off-site manufacturing. We formed a couple of JVs. They didn't quite materialise in the way we wanted them to. But I think if what that does is stops you from doing stuff, you're sort of learning nothing, aren't you? You've got to take the learning from that and say, okay, let's dust ourselves off. They weren't two people, but let's dust ourselves off and learn what we can learn, and then move on, really.
Yeah, and look, I still firmly believe there's something in that at some point in the future that will come to fruition. Whether it was the 3D off-site thing that we all thought it might be, maybe not. But it's certainly something that I believe we can be more efficient in building homes, and it's proven in other countries. So it happens.
It's got to be, James, isn't it? I mean, it's got to be, because we simply can't carry on as we're going at the moment, to be quite honest with you. So if you're talking about how do you uprate development, off-site manufacturing in some way, whether that's full MMC, factory product, whatever, it's got to be part of the solution, isn't it?
Well, the thing that kills MMC is the lack of in, out that you mentioned, is that they need volume constantly, not volume for half a year and then no volume for the other half of the year. We need to be consistent in our development, but it's difficult because the funding's not necessarily there, which sort of leads me to the budget, really topical, because it was, we're recording this early before we release it, but obviously the budget's been quite well talked about around the development programme. I think we knew it was coming, some of the stuff they put in there. The 500 million was talked about quite a long way before. The 5 billion additional, the planning's going to change. What was your view? What's Vivid's sort of view on the budget and how that's going to impact development and the organisation, more broadly speaking?
Broadly, I think we have I think the sector started with a much more positive relationship with the Labour Party than we finished with our relationship with the Conservatives, to be quite honest with you. So I think that is a really, really good thing. And I think the budget had some really good signals in it, didn't it? It's the 500 million, the rent, the rent settlement, planning reforms are coming. I think also for me, it was like a bright start. I don't think there was anything there that particularly surprised me. Maybe the NI surprised me a little bit, but even that was trailed a little bit beforehand. And sometimes it feels like government the right hand doesn't really know what the implications of what the left hand's doing. But I think overall, if you're sitting in the housing sector here at Vivid, we would say that was a good early start. I mean, the 500 million quid change in the affordable homes programme, of which 100 is going to London, isn't going to move the dial on development, but it plugs a little gap. And I think it signals some really interesting things for the spending review coming up. And the sector's got a job to do now, I think, between where we are now in November and probably, middle of February, end of February, March time, to really, I think, work with the Labour Party. And I think they do understand really well, the Labour Party, actually, but work with the Labour Party in making the case for even more funding, because our development programme output comes from confidence and certainty, and the government can give you that. We get some of that from running our business efficiently and generating surpluses, but we are actually a strategic partner. We've had just over £300 million worth of housing and grant funding to support our development programme. So SP3 or whatever is going to come next has to help us with that problem. And then organisations like mine, I think, and I don't think this is universal across the sector, but I think organisations like mine will then feel confident to buy land and get it through the planning system and all of those sorts of things, which is pretty torturous now in a way which it never used to be. So optimistic about the budget, good start. Let's see what the spending review brings. And I think locally, when I talk to, access to local Labour MPs for me is much higher than probably it was when my access to Tory MPs. So there's, I think they are genuinely interested. So it can only be good, but the proof is in the pudding, James, isn't it? They need the spending review to really move the dial, I think.
Yeah, I've worked in the sector a long time and done development for a long time, and I would say that we've been talking about planning for a lot of those years in some capacity, right? So, I'm very much the proof is in the pudding. One thing you've said which really, really resonated with me is around commerciality, and I know we'd not planned to talk about this, but how important is it going to be moving forward that businesses do run, and housing associations specifically, run more commercially to be able to create surplus so that they can invest in all the things that we need to, the damp and mold problem's not going away, the efficiency of our homes isn't going away, we need to build more. But these things can only happen with some surplus.
I wouldn't sit here on this podcast and say that housing associations don't run commercially, to be honest with you. And my experience is we're a little bit unclear about what that really means, really. But generating surpluses are important, generating profits are important. It's actually about generating cash. Again, it generates cash and it generates confidence in the investment community to invest in our businesses. I think that is quite important. Are we as a sector always really, really focused on cost? Are we as a sector really focused on doing stuff for our customers that we think really adds value from our customers' perspective rather than things that we might think are important? I don't know, question mark. They're the sorts of things we try to talk about at Vivid, really. So I think commerciality is going to be important, but I suppose I would say I don't think the sector's not commercial.
No, I agree.
But it's going to have to continue. I think we're going to have to continue to be like that in order to deliver the sorts of homes we want to deliver, really.
Yeah, and I've seen the sector buying commercial businesses now, right, to generate that money that they need to do other things. And there's been some really big deals done in the last 6-8 weeks, I think, where we are seeing big commercial businesses coming into the sector. And actually, I was probably against that 10 years ago. I'm really for it now, because I think if that's going to generate the funding we need to be able to go and do all these activities, we need to make the sector better, then I'm all for it, I think, actually.
At the end of the day, I think knowing what your social purpose is and how we'll all achieve that in slightly different ways, and that's okay. And I think sometimes when we brought in a small, medium-sized developer, Bargate, we brought it in for its land bank. And actually, we gained loads of expertise as well. So there are lots of things you can gain. But that commerciality, that sort of, I think is going to continue to be important, really.
Yeah, I agree. There's a need definitely for some cultural change nationwide to increase our building capacity. What's your thoughts on that, around what the cultural change would need to be for us to be a building nation and for us to increase the capacity of what we build in the country?
Yeah, I've got to be a little bit careful what I say here, really, because I was chatting to this with one other. I might be a bit extreme, really. But I think I can liken it to what we've done at Vivid, really. So what we've done at Vivid, and this isn't, excuse me, I'm not great with language. It's sort of like slightly clumsy language, really. But what we've done at Vivid, I think, is turn from a development perspective. We've got ourselves to position to, rather than talk about all the reasons why we shouldn't do something, to talk about all the reasons why we should do something. So if something comes to the table to our investment committee, we will obviously be cognizant of the risks and we turn stuff down, or, we do turn stuff down, but actually we're much more in a cultural mindset, which says, how can we build some more homes? An example of that for me is just outside this office where I am in Portsmouth at the moment. There's a massive site, 835 homes. No one would touch it. It's been an old petrol dumping scrapyard. It's had all the things wrong with it that anybody would possibly want with it. We approach that and say, actually, how can we make this work? Which partners do we need to make this work? How can we problem solve this, really? And I think when then we talk about the England, UK, I think it's the same issue, really. We need to get to a situation where I think that as a country we are permissive of new homes. We sort of recognise that these are places where our families are going to live and we might retire to, or whatever it be. And there are lots of artificial barriers in the way. I work in the Central South. I mean, you try to have a conversation sometimes with local authorities in the Central South. It's like they've got a castle wall around their local authority. But and he's tried to say to people, actually, you do know that people live in other local authorities that work in your local authority. And we did a big piece of work here with an organisation called Business South Central about actually how we have a housing manifesto for the Central South, which doesn't recognise local authority borders. Can we just get everybody? That's part of that cultural change, really. I think it's coming. Everybody's talking about housing. I think it's great. It's a bit of a shame that it needs to become such a crisis it's become in order for that to happen. But we've got to get to a position where we say, actually, housing development is good for us, good for our communities, good for our nation, good for our people, and therefore we should be presumptuous of doing it rather than not doing it. And that requires, I think, a slightly different. We need, I'm going to be slightly controversial now. We need, grey-haired old people like me stopping running planning committees, and young people who don't actually have homes running planning committees and stuff, don't we? Because that's how we're going to change the culture. I think. Yeah,
and look, and I don't want to lean into this too much, but what are the barriers for us to achieve and to fix the housing crisis? Because I was looking at this the other day and thinking about just reflecting on how have we moved the dial in 10 years. And we have in loads of respects, but we've still got a skills shortage, I believe. We've still got a planning problem in the country where it's very difficult. We've still got a land inflation problem / availability problem. It's difficult. But what do you see as some of the things that we might be able to unlock to really move the dial on the housing crisis and really push forward? I know we've talked about some of it, but what are some of the other barriers for us to make that achievable?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, and probably the hardest one you've asked me since we've been on this podcast. but I think we have to make planning easier. I'm not sure the planning reforms are really going to do that, but it's not just about planning. It's about all sorts of regulation, So whether it's building safety regulator, which is holding up planning consents, whether it's Section 278 works, highways works, it's bigger than just planning. There is a skills gap. I think there's a skills gap in planners in local authorities. There's a skills gap in planners in county council. So we have to do something about that, I think. And I do think part of it's what we were talking about earlier. There is an off-site manufacturing thing we need to get right. These organisations are very good at producing product. We need to get the planning system aligned to that and the land acquisition process aligned to that so that they can roll off the end of the production line and into occupation. Fundamentally, we need to do something about land, I think. And I wrote a piece, probably 15 years ago now, or British Property Week or whatever it was at the time, Property Weekly or something, and saying actually fundamentally the value of land is overpriced in England. Two issues. A, we don't think we've got any of it, but we've actually got quite a lot of it. And B, what we've got is generally overpriced. Somehow we need to unlock that, I think, really. We need to unlock the value that people think is attributable to a piece of land, whether it be brownfield, greenfield, or whatever great belt might be, I don't know how you do that. I think if I did, I'd probably buy a lottery ticket the weekend and have a beach in the highways. But do you know what I mean? But there's something for clever people, I think, to say, actually, how does all of this sort of come together, really? But fundamentally, if land were cheaper, house prices would be cheaper. It would be cheaper. Everything would work.
No, I like that, and thank you for that. Put you under the spot a little bit there. But a final thing, and something that I just wanted to finish on, really, was, what's next from Vivid? You've achieved the goal, I think, or you've certainly on your way to the goal in a lot of ways. What's next from a house building perspective, from a business perspective? What's the aspiration now moving forward?
We've always been relatively clear here that it's about running the best business we can run, and we're actually, this is very unusual for me to do a podcast or any type of media type stuff. But because we're sort of like, let's just be brilliant and everybody will recognize it and we'll just, we'll be brilliant. So the future for us is more of that, really, I think, how we keep pushing the envelope a little bit more. We will build probably, as I said, 1,500 to 1,600 homes a year over the next 2 or 3 years. Hopefully there'll be some grant program coming alongside it in the spending review, which will allow us maybe to even increase that number slightly. We think we've got a good thing to do. We're investing millions in technology at the moment to try and sort of move the dial on the digital piece, really. We think that's if you roll forward 5 or 10 years, lots of things we do with people will be being done by artificial intelligence. So we're investing heavily in Microsoft Dynamics and how that interplays with artificial intelligence. Now we might get some of those things just done across the business. So there's lots of exciting things. We're open for discussions with other organizations if they want to come and be part of the Vivid thing. That would be quite good. We think there's a role for us to play in our locality, though. In my board, my executive team, the organization is quite clear that we need to make the best use of the social pound that we can make, and actually there's a lots to do in our locality. So there'll be a bit more of that. That's not a very succinct expression.
No, it's amazing. No. To be honest, it is. And firstly, to pick up on your point about not doing these sorts of things, like my whole reason for doing this is to start sharing some of the key messages and voices in the sector. I think it's important that people come out of their comfort zone and talk about the things that they do well. I've partnered, and our business has partnered with Vivid, and I think you're an excellent organisation doing great things in the communities you serve. And actually, the way you talk about development makes it look quite easy, and I know it's not. So, but what I would say, Mark, is honestly, I appreciate all the time you've put into this process. And I know people are going to get loads and loads of input and insights from that discussion. But if people do want to reach out from the sector about how you've achieved some of the things you have, are you happy to speak to people?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Sort of personally and organisationally, we are here to share what we know, really. So that's absolutely. But I'd be delighted if that was one of the outcomes. If people came and said, actually, just talk us through how you did that. That would be good, I think. Yeah.
Amazing. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the HIP podcast.
That's okay.
Cheers.
Great. Nice to meet you.
Take
it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The HIP. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.